You changed the Wi-Fi password, didn't you? The voice wasn't just sharp, it was venomous. Drake Jenkins froze, his coffee cup halfway to his lips. The peaceful hum of the morning shattered as Karen Whitmore marched across his lawn, eyes blazing beneath perfectly curled blonde hair. Her face, usually stretched into a thin, disapproving smile, was contorted in fury. "You damn well heard me," she barked, stepping onto the porch. "You changed the password. My internet's dead." Drake lowered his cup, heart ticking faster. "Yeah, I did." Karen's chest heaved as if she'd just run a mile. She stood there in her pristine beige pantsuit, nostrils flaring with each breath. "Who the hell do you think you are?" she spat. "You can't just pull the plug on me. I need that Wi-Fi." His eyes narrowed. "That Wi-Fi," he said slowly, "is mine." Karen's mouth twisted into a sneer. "Yours, please. You don't even belong here. People like you don't buy houses in neighborhoods like this. You show up with your loud music and your tacky cars and start locking things down like you own the place." Drake's stomach knotted. He felt the blood rush to his ears. He'd heard variations of this before, just never from 6 feet away on his own damn porch. "I pay for that internet," he said, voice low but firm. "Every month, out of my pocket." "Big deal," Karen snapped. "I've been using that network for months. If it was such a problem, why didn't you say something sooner?" "Because I didn't know you were stealing it until last night," Drake said. "And I don't owe you Wi-Fi, Karen. Now get off my property." Her laugh was sharp and humorless. "Your property? Please. People like you don't own property like this. You just sneak your way in. And now you're cutting me off? You're nothing but a—" She caught herself before finishing the word, but the malice in her eyes said enough. Drake felt his jaw clench so hard it ached. His mind screamed at him to stay calm. Karen wanted a reaction. She wanted to draw him into a fight, turn him into the aggressive black man she'd probably already imagined him to be. Karen leaned forward, voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I can make one call," she said. "Just one. Tell them you're harassing me, threatening me. And you know how that'll go, don't you?" Drake's throat went dry. "Now," she continued, louder again, "you give me that new password, or we'll see who the cops believe when they get here." His pulse pounded in his ears. He considered his options. Giving in wasn't one of them. "No." Karen's face darkened to a blotchy red. She took a step back and yanked her phone from her pocket. "Fine. Have it your way," she snarled. "Let's see what happens when I call and tell them some strange black man is trying to break into my Wi-Fi." She jabbed the screen with her thumb and lifted it to her ear. Drake stood still, fists clenched at his sides. His mind raced through the possibilities. The cops would come. They always came. And what would they see? A middle-aged white woman crying about her dangerous black neighbor while he stood here looking angry and defensive. Karen's voice rose as she spoke into the phone. "Yes, hello? I need the police. There's a suspicious man outside my house. He's been tampering with my Wi-Fi and threatening me." She locked eyes with Drake and smiled. "I'm so scared," she said into the phone, her voice trembling with manufactured fear. "Please hurry." Drake didn't move. He didn't shout. He just stood there as Karen ended the call and slipped her phone back into her pocket. "Get off my property," Drake said quietly. Karen's mouth opened, but the words didn't come right away. Her eyes darkened. "This isn't over," she spat. "You don't belong here, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows it." She turned sharply on her heel and stalked away, her heels clicking with each step. Drake stood there long after she was gone, the warmth of his coffee long since gone cold. The night before, it had all started with a buffering screen. Drake had been stretched out on the couch, halfway through an old detective show, when the video froze. At first, he figured it was just a glitch. Happened sometimes, even with the upgraded plan he paid for every month. He backed out, tried again. Nothing. He sat up, rubbing his eyes. It was nearly 10 p.m., and he'd been up since 5 that morning. Tech issues were the last thing he wanted to deal with. Still, curiosity tugged at him. The Wi-Fi had been slow all week, laggy video calls, pages taking forever to load. It wasn't normal. With a sigh, he grabbed his laptop and logged into the router settings. The dashboard came up, clean and familiar. Everything looked normal, but when he checked the connected devices list, his stomach tightened. There it was, a device he didn't recognize. The name was gibberish, just random letters and numbers, but the connection logs showed it had been online for months, sometimes at 2 or 3 in the morning, sucking up bandwidth like a leech. Drake sat back, heart ticking faster. He wasn't the paranoid type, but this was weird. He refreshed the page, hoping maybe it was some old device of his he'd forgotten. It wasn't. The MAC address didn't match anything he owned. He opened a new tab, typed, "How to block unknown devices from your router." 5 minutes later, he changed the password and kicked the stranger off his network. The moment he hit save, the Wi-Fi stabilized. The buffering stopped. Everything ran smooth as glass. Relief washed over him, but it didn't last. Someone in his neighborhood had been piggybacking off his connection. For months. Who? Why? And what had they been doing online? Drake shut the laptop and leaned back against the couch. The lamp cast long, jagged shadows across the walls. His gut told him something wasn't right. He considered digging deeper into the logs, but was too exhausted to think straight. "It's probably just some kid next door," he muttered. "Gaming or streaming movies." He didn't believe it. At 2:37 a.m., he woke up drenched in sweat from a dream he couldn't remember. He stared at the ceiling, wide awake, the faint hum of the router whispering from the corner. The next morning, Karen had come stomping up his porch with that entitled sneer. Drake sat now in his small kitchen, coffee cup abandoned on the desk. The laptop glowed softly in front of him. He reopened the router logs, this time scrolling past the surface-level connections. His heart knocked against his ribs as he dug deeper. Whoever had been using his Wi-Fi wasn't just watching Netflix or scrolling social media. The logs showed visits to forums he didn't recognize, sites with names like Heritage Front and True Nation, pages packed with hate speech and conspiracy theories. His eyes scanned the entries. Someone had spent hours on these forums, posting under usernames like Pure America 1957. He clicked on one of the links, but the page was gone. Deleted. The list went deeper. Marketplace transactions, encrypted messages. There were multiple visits to racist forums filled with hate speech, conspiracy theories, and calls for violence. Karen had spent hours on these sites, posting under anonymous usernames, spewing venom about minorities, and even doxing people she didn't like. That was bad enough. But then he found something worse. Buried in the data were encrypted transactions linked to fraudulent activities. Someone, Karen most likely, had been running online scams, selling stolen goods through various marketplaces. There were even traces of what looked like identity theft, credit card information being processed through shady websites. Drake leaned back in his chair, exhaling sharply. This woman had been committing serious crimes, all while pretending to be a victim. And she had been using his Wi-Fi to do it, probably thinking it would make her harder to trace. His jaw clenched. She had called the police on him over an internet password, yet she was the real criminal. Then he spotted one final, damning detail. A login attempt to an illegal site flagged for trafficking explicit material. He ran a hand down his face. Jesus Christ. Karen's voice echoed in his memory. "I've been using that network for months." The realization hit Drake like a gut punch. She'd been committing these crimes under his roof, well, his Wi-Fi, probably convinced that the stolen connection would cloak her identity. His jaw tightened, the weight of her audacity sinking in. She had actually called the police on him over a damn internet password when she was the one orchestrating an online cesspool of hatred and scams. He leaned in closer, eyes scanning the screen. Then he saw it. One last unforgiving revelation. A login attempt to a flagged site known for trafficking explicit material. His stomach lurched. His fingers hovered above the keyboard for a moment before he clicked the file, confirming what he wished wasn't true. If the police ran a deep dive into her activity, who knew what else they'd uncover? The bile rose in his throat as he quickly took screenshots, every damning detail meticulously captured and saved to a USB drive. Karen Whitmore, the same woman who stood proudly on her manicured lawn every 4th of July, waving a flag like she owned the stars and stripes. The same woman who now thought she could twist the law to her will, just like she'd twisted the truth to the dispatcher. But this time, she'd tangled with the wrong person. Outside, a rising wail cut through the thick afternoon air. Sirens, growing louder. Drake straightened as the blue and red strobe lights reflected off the living room walls. He set the USB drive on the desk and walked back to the porch, stepping out into the sticky heat. The police cruiser rolled to a stop in his driveway. 2 officers stepped out, one tall and lean with sharp, observant eyes, the other stockier with a thick mustache. Their uniforms looked crisp in the afternoon sunlight, but their expressions gave away nothing. Karen sprang into action the moment they appeared, charging across the lawn like a woman possessed. "Officers! Oh, thank God you're here!" she wailed, clutching her chest like she'd just escaped a horror movie villain. Her voice quivered with perfectly rehearsed panic as she jabbed a finger toward Drake. "It's him! That man right there! He hacked into my internet and he's been stealing information from me, from the whole neighborhood. I don't feel safe." Officer Jordan, the taller one, raised a hand. His gaze flicked from her frantic expression to Drake, who stood motionless on the porch with his arms crossed. "Mom, slow down," Jordan said, voice calm and measured. "Tell me exactly what happened." Karen sucked in a shaky breath. Her eyes glistened with tears that hadn't existed seconds before. I was just sitting in my house," she began, voice breaking, "minding my own business, and suddenly my internet stopped working. I knew something was wrong, so I checked, and I realized he—" Her finger shot toward Drake like a dagger. "Had hacked into my network. When I went over there to ask him to stop, he got aggressive. He threatened me. I had to call you before he did something worse." Drake let out a slow breath through his nose. His heart raced, but his face remained composed. He'd seen this performance before. Different players, same script. Officer Miller, the shorter cop, arched a brow and shifted his weight. His gaze lingered on Karen for a beat too long, skepticism etched into the lines around his mouth. "Huh," he muttered. Miller turned toward Drake. "Sir, your side of the story." Drake lowered his arms and gestured toward Karen without taking his eyes off the officers. "She's been stealing my Wi-Fi for months," he said, voice steady. "I changed my password this morning. A couple hours later, she showed up at my door, demanding I give it to her. When I refused, she lost it. And, well, here we are." Jordan's face remained neutral, but Miller let out a short, surprised chuckle. "Wait, she called the cops? Because you changed your own Wi-Fi password?" Karen's head whipped toward him, eyes narrowing. "It's more than that," she barked. "He's been hacking. He's probably doing all kinds of illegal stuff online. He is black. You need to check his devices before it's too late." Jordan pulled out his notepad. Okay, let's slow down here." He turned to her, pen poised. "Karen, you say you believe Mr. Jenkins here hacked into your network. Do you have any proof?" Karen opened her mouth. "Shut it. Her eyes darted toward the officers, then toward Drake, who simply raised his eyebrows. Well, no. But I know it was him. Jordan said nothing, just scribbled a note. Then he shifted his focus back to Drake. And you're saying she's been using your internet without permission? That's right. Can you prove it? Drake gave a single nod. Yeah, I've got the connection logs inside. I took screenshots this morning. Jordan and Miller exchanged a glance. Miller gave the faintest shrug, like he'd already made up his mind about who was lying. Jordan nodded toward the front door. Okay, let's take a look. Karen's lips pressed together. Her confident smirk faltered for the first time. Her eyes flicked from the officers to Drake as they moved toward the house. She followed, slower this time, her steps hesitant. Drake led them into the living room. The air conditioning hummed softly as he sat at his desk, plugged in the USB drive, and pulled up the saved files. Karen hovered in the doorway, her shoulders rigid. Here's the router log, Drake said, pointing to the screen. This MAC address doesn't belong to me or any of my devices, but it's been connected to my Wi-Fi for months. You can see here. He clicked a folder. The timestamps show regular activity, mostly late at night. And these sites? His jaw tightened. They're not exactly Netflix. Jordan leaned in, frowning at the list of websites. Hate forums, fraudulent marketplaces, and, most damning of all, the flagged site. Jesus, Miller muttered, eyes widening. Karen went pale. That's not mine, she shrieked. He's a hacker. He must have planted all that. Drake didn't even look at her. Karen, your IP address is right there, he said flatly. You were using my network, remember? Every action you took online was logged under my router. Jordan straightened, his expression hardening. So let me get this straight, he said, eyes on Karen. You've been connecting to his Wi-Fi without permission, and now you're saying he somehow fabricated all this. Karen's mouth opened and closed, her face blotchy with panic. It's a setup. He's dangerous. I told you. Drake turned in his chair and met her wild-eyed glare with calm disdain. Karen, you called the cops thinking they'd believe you, he said softly. But all you did was hand-deliver them the evidence they needed. Karen's chest rose and fell in shallow, panicked breaths. No, this isn't fair, she whispered. Officer Jordan exhaled through his nose, the decision clear in his eyes. He reached for his cuffs. Karen's voice broke. Please, she whimpered. I'm the victim here. Jordan didn't respond. He simply clicked the cuffs around her wrists with a cold, metallic snap. Karen let out a choked, guttural scream, but this time, no one came to save her. Then, Drake inserted the USB drive into the laptop, the device clicking softly as it connected. The screen came to life, displaying the neatly organized folders of evidence he'd compiled the night before. His fingers moved with calm precision as he opened the files, the weight of the moment sitting heavily in the room. The soft hum of the computer seemed deafening against the tension crackling in the air. I checked the router's activity logs, Drake said, his voice even as he navigated through the screens. The cursor hovered over a folder labeled Wi-Fi logs. A single click, and the damning truth spilled across the screen. Karen's been freeloading off my internet for quite a while, and the sites she's been visiting. He tapped the screen and leaned back, his eyes locking with Officer Jordan's. Let's just say, they're far from harmless. The two officers leaned in, their faces hardening as the sordid details revealed themselves. Transaction records tied to fraudulent websites, strings of messages from anonymous accounts spewing vile, racist propaganda, and the darkest discovery of all, a logged attempt to access an illegal site notorious for trafficking in child exploitation materials. Officer Miller let out a sharp whistle. Jesus, he muttered, his voice laced with disbelief. Across the room, Karen Whitmore stood rigid, her complexion drained of color. The confident, self-assured sneer she'd worn earlier was gone, replaced by the wide-eyed terror of someone watching the walls close in. Her mouth opened, her voice cracking as she shrieked, "That's a lie! He made all this up!" Drake didn't turn. He kept his gaze fixed on the screen as if she were nothing more than background noise. "Karen," he said, tilting his head toward the laptop, "your IP address is right there. Same one you've been using for months. All these connections were routed through my network. Everything you did online left a trail." Karen's eyes darted between Drake and the officers, desperation twisting her features. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, rapid breaths. Officer Jordan folded his arms across his chest, his face unreadable. "Let me get this straight," he said, voice low and measured. "You've been using this man's Wi-Fi without permission. And now you're saying he somehow manufactured all this evidence to frame you?" Karen's jaw worked soundlessly. She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. It's a setup," she stammered. "He's a hacker. I told you he's dangerous." Drake turned to face her now, a slow smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. His dark eyes glinted with restrained satisfaction. "Karen," he said softly, "you called the cops thinking they'd come here and haul me away for changing my own password. But all you did was hand-deliver them to your doorstep, with a front-row seat to your mess." Karen's body jerked, as though the words had struck her physically. Her eyes narrowed into slits. "You smug bastard!" she spat. Her gaze snapped toward Officer Jordan. "You're just going to believe him? He's probably tampered with everything on that computer. Can't you see what he's doing? I'm the victim here." Officer Jordan's expression didn't shift. "Karen," he said, voice flat, "this isn't looking good for you." "Yeah," Officer Miller added, his tone edged with dry disdain. "And judging by what we're seeing here, we're just scratching the surface. We'll need to pull more of your activity logs. See what else you've been up to." Karen's panic erupted in an instant. "No! No! This isn't fair!" she shrieked, her voice shrill and fractured. Her eyes locked on Drake with wild, unhinged fury. "He's the criminal! He's the one you should be arresting!" Then she lunged. Her body shot forward like a coiled spring unleashed. Her manicured nails, still painted a crisp French white, slashed toward Drake's face. The motion was quick but clumsy, fueled by pure, unthinking rage. Drake barely flinched. He'd seen it coming from the moment her breath caught in her chest. Before her hand reached its target, Officer Miller stepped in. With practiced efficiency, he seized Karen's wrist and twisted her arm behind her back. She howled in pain, her knees buckling under the sudden pressure. "That's assault," Miller said coolly, tightening his grip as she thrashed like a caught animal. "And now it's on top of everything else you've got coming." "You can't do this!" Karen screamed, her voice cracked with hysteria. "I'm the victim! Don't you get it? I'm the victim here!" Officer Jordan pulled his radio from his shoulder. His thumb pressed down on the button with the same calm detachment he'd maintained since stepping into the house. "Dispatch, this is Jordan. We have a suspect in custody, requesting backup for further investigation." Karen's breath hitched. "Suspect?" she echoed, her voice dropping to a whimper. No. Wait. You don't understand." Drake crossed his arms over his chest and watched the woman unravel. "Oh," he said quietly, "we understand just fine." The realization hit her like ice water to the face. Karen's eyes widened as the last fragments of her confidence shattered. Her head jerked toward the window as if she might find some escape, some sympathetic neighbor who would swoop in to defend her. But the street outside was empty, except for the faint shimmer of heat rising from the asphalt. The truth was inescapable. Her panic morphed into blind, animalistic rage. "You lying thug!" she shrieked, her voice raw. Her body convulsed as she tried to wrench herself free from Miller's grip. Her cheeks flushed crimson and spittle gathered at the corners of her mouth. "You think you can do this to me? You think anyone's going to believe a black man over me?" The room froze. Drake's jaw clenched, but he didn't move. Miller's grip tightened on her wrist. Officer Jordan's hand hovered near his cuffs. Karen's eyes flared with hatred. Her upper lip curled, and then she did the unthinkable. She spat. The glob of saliva hit Officer Jordan's face just below his left eye. Everything went still. Jordan didn't speak. He didn't react immediately. His jaw tensed as he pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped his cheek with slow, deliberate movements. Miller's breath hissed through his teeth. Drake shifted his weight, his stomach turning. Jordan let out a breath and replaced the handkerchief in his pocket. Then he stepped forward, drawing the cuffs from his belt with a metallic clink. "Karen Whitmore," he said, his voice devoid of emotion, "you're under arrest for assaulting an officer, cybercrime, and fraud. You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it." "No!" Karen shrieked, twisting and kicking as the cuffs snapped around her wrists. "No! You can't do this to me. I'm a white woman. I have rights." Miller gave a disgusted shake of his head as he helped Jordan wrestle her toward the door. "Yeah," he muttered, "and you just used up every last one." Karen's screams echoed through the house as they dragged her outside. The sunlight caught her tear-streaked face, turning her into a grotesque mask of disbelief. Drake stood at the doorway, arms still crossed, and watched the performance to its bitter end. Officer Jordan dragged a hand across his face, wiping away the spittle with deliberate slowness. His jaw clenched, the muscles tightening beneath his skin. He'd faced his share of racial hostility before, but this was something beyond the usual venom. For a moment, his hand hovered near his cuffs as he inhaled deeply, grounding himself in the calm that his badge demanded. Beside him, Officer Miller shook his head with a low, disgusted scoff. "Well, congratulations, Karen," he said, his voice edged with bitter amusement. "You just took a bad day and made it the worst one of your life." Jordan didn't even spare Karen a glance. He reached for his cuffs with the mechanical ease of someone who'd done this more times than he could count. The metallic snap echoed in the tense silence. "Karen Whitmore, you're under arrest for assaulting an officer, cybercrime, and fraud." The words landed like a hammer. Karen's entire body seized, the weight of reality finally sinking in. For one suspended second, she stood frozen. Then it shattered. "No, no, no!" she shrieked, thrashing like a wild animal caught in a trap. "You can't do this. I'm the victim." Her legs kicked aimlessly, heels scraping the pavement as Miller helped Jordan wrestle her wrists behind her back. Her face twisted with desperation as her voice reached a fever pitch. "He's the one you should be arresting," she wailed, jerking her chin toward Drake, who stood motionless on his porch. "He's the criminal. He's dangerous. He's been hacking my Wi-Fi." Drake didn't flinch. He didn't move. His arms remained crossed over his chest, eyes flat and unreadable as the chaos played out in front of him. The crowd of neighbors had grown, spilling onto the sidewalks. Phones hovered in the air like digital witnesses, cameras capturing every second. The whispers swirled through the gathering. "That's Karen? I heard she called the cops for no reason." "Wait, cybercrime? She spit on a cop, you see that?" "Get your hands off me!" Karen bellowed as they dragged her toward the patrol car. Her voice cracked with desperation. "This isn't fair. You don't understand. I was just—" The car door slammed, cutting off her protests mid-sentence. Through the closed window, her mouth kept moving, the words lost to the thick pane of glass. Miller let out a breath and shook his head. "She just doesn't know when to quit, huh?" From the porch, Drake gave a low chuckle. "Nope. But I'd say she finally ran out of luck." Jordan turned to him, the tension easing slightly from his shoulders. "You kept it together better than most would have," he said. Drake lifted one shoulder in a shrug. Honestly, I was just waiting for karma to do its thing. Jordan's mouth curved into a dry smile. Well, looks like karma had some backup today. By the time the police cruiser rolled away, the street was buzzing with quiet disbelief. The woman who'd once strutted through the neighborhood like she owned every brick and blade of grass was now gone, her wrists bound in steel. It didn't take long for the story to spread. By sunrise the next morning, Karen Whitmore's name was plastered across news websites, social media feeds, and morning TV broadcasts. The headline was brutal. Racist woman arrested after attacking black neighbor over Wi-Fi, shocking cybercrime evidence uncovered. The footage recorded by curious neighbors went viral with wildfire speed. There she was, face contorted in rage, screaming about Wi-Fi and people like him. There was the spit, caught in high definition as it landed on Officer Jordan's cheek. And finally, the arrest, the moment she was yanked off Drake's porch and stuffed into the patrol car. The internet feasted on it. Comment sections overflowed with outrage, sarcasm, and grim satisfaction. Memes popped up within hours. Karen's furious face captioned with phrases like, "When your Wi-Fi bill finally comes due," and "password-protected, public enemy number one." But the online humiliation was only the beginning. Within days, the neighborhood association convened an emergency meeting in the community center down the block. The vote was swift and unanimous. Karen Whitmore was officially expelled from the neighborhood. The letter was hand-delivered to her doorstep. "Ms. Whitmore, due to your conduct, you are hereby banned from all association events and requested to vacate the premises within 60 days. Karen didn't make it that long. Her house, the immaculate, perfectly landscaped fortress she'd once bragged about at every block party, became a millstone around her neck. The legal fees from the mounting charges drained her savings. The mortgage payments went unpaid. Foreclosure followed like a vulture circling overhead. By the end of the month, the for sale sign stood crookedly in her front yard, half covered in wilted leaves. Across the street, Drake finally got what he'd been chasing all along: peace. One crisp evening, he sat on his porch with a mug of hot coffee in hand. The Wi-Fi was faster than ever. No more unexplained lag, no more stolen bandwidth, no more angry neighbors stomping onto his porch like they owned it. His phone buzzed on the side table. A message from Marcus. "Bro, you're a legend. She really thought she could get away with that. SMH. Drake shook his head, a soft laugh escaping his lips. "She thought she was untouchable," he murmured to himself. "Guess she found out otherwise." As the sun melted into the horizon, he inhaled deeply, the crisp evening air filling his lungs. Justice had been served, and for the first time in a long time, it was a good day. Hey guys. Wow. What a wild ride this story was, right? Now, before we wrap up, I just want to remind you, this story is purely fictional. None of this actually happened. But man, the themes, the lessons, they're as real as it gets. What we just walked through wasn't just about stolen Wi-Fi or a neighbor from hell. It was about power, privilege, and the ugly truth of racial bias that still lingers in society today. Karen didn't just steal internet, she weaponized her privilege. She thought she could call the cops, cry danger, and let the system handle the rest, all because of the color of Drake's skin. And let's be honest, stories like this, though fictional here, hit close to home for a lot of people. The fear, the frustration, the exhausting need to stay calm when someone's trying to push you into reacting. It's a reality too many face every day. But justice, in the end, came through. Not because it magically appeared, but because Drake stayed calm, collected the facts, and let the truth speak louder than the lies. So, what do you guys think? If you were in Drake's shoes, how would you have handled it? Or maybe you've seen or experienced a Karen moment yourself. Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And hey, if you liked this story and want to hear more tales with twists, truths, and a little bit of that karmic justice, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell. Stay safe, stay kind, and remember, Wi-Fi isn't the only thing we should protect. Our humanity needs a strong password too. See you in the next one.